All right, so we're starting a new unit, and I wanted to just do a quick video kind of explaining like where we're headed, right, as we go into this unit 6. Now, the best way to explain where we're going is to kind of recap what we've done so far. So think back to maybe a couple units ago. The main focus was graphing linear equations, right? We spent a lot of time making sure you guys knew how to graph. So graphing linear equations. And it all started off with like y is equal to mx plus b, right? Begin with b and then you move with m, right? So we spent a ton of time on graphing with linear equations. Then after that, we went into, well, now that you know how to use these equations, like, can you actually write your own equation? So that's what this past unit was about. It was about writing linear equations, okay? And then we also had this little mini unit where we talked about some word problems, right? I know not everybody enjoys word problems, but they really are um, how math applies to like a real world scenario, right? We did have little mini units talking about word problems, okay? So now where we're going is sometimes one equation is just not enough, right? If you're trying to explain something, sometimes like you can't get it with just one set of variables, right? So we're going to introduce this idea of what's called a system of equations. Okay, and what a system of equations, is basically when we use two or more equations working together. Okay, so two or more equations working together. Okay, now as far as this class is concerned, we're probably going to stick with just two equations. But as you go farther in math, you could get like a system of three equations or four equations. Or if you're like me and you go to college for math, sometimes you have like a system of six equations or whatever the case may be. Okay, so a system of equations is just two or more. For this class, it'll be probably just two equations. Okay, and essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to bring all the stuff we've done previously in other units, we're going to apply to this. So we're going to graph them together because they're part of the same system, they work together, right? So we're going to graph them together, and we are even going to solve them together. So before, when we were graphing linear equations originally, we had like one graph and one line, right? So now we'll have like maybe two equations, which means we're going to have two separate lines, and we'll be looking at how they interact with each other. Okay. Now the way they look, it kind of depends on the question. Let's go write that down. So what it looks like. Okay. Sometimes, in fact, probably most of the time, they'll just list out the equations, right? It's like this could be like a standard example where your first equation is y is equal to negative 2x plus 5, and your other equation is y is equal to 4x minus 1. So two different equations, but we're giving them to you at the same time, so that's what we call a system of equations. Okay. Now sometimes they'll put in these little marks, like this kind of a mark, saying that it's a system. Sometimes they don't. Kind of just depends on who's writing the questions. Okay. Another kind of system that you will see eventually, not right away, but you will see it at some point. It's called a piecewise function. Here's what it looks like: f of x equals, and then now we split it up into two, where it looks like this: negative 1/2 x plus 2 if x is greater than or equal to 2, and then 2/3 x minus 3 if x is less than 2. So this one's called a piecewise. It's kind of like a special case. okay? Whereas like a system of equations, like on the left, the one we got over here, um, this one is two separate lines interacting with each other, okay? Versus a piecewise function. A piecewise function is technically one line, but it behaves in two different ways. Okay, so we'll get to those at some point, but not right away. Okay, so that's what they look like. Okay, now the first method of solving these systems is going to be graphing. So I did want to do a very quick recap of how to graph these things. I'm pretty sure once you see it, you'll remember how to do it pretty quickly. Okay, so this is what Unit 6 is about, is the system of equations. Okay, let's go ahead and section this off and let's do a quick review of graphing. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't, we'll see. Okay, so we scroll down. All right, so this is just a graphing review. Okay, now most of the equations we're going to be working with will be in slope-intercept form. So y is equal to mx plus b. And if you guys remember when we first graphed these things, they were fairly easy, right? As long as you know what m and b do, right? So m, that's the slope. It's usually a fraction, right? Rise over run, or remember you can think of it as your up and down value on top of your left and right value, rise over run, okay? And then your b value, that was your y-intercept, okay? So we always knew that starting point, wherever we began with, was always 0, comma, whatever b is, okay? Now I even mentioned, if it helps you to remember like how to start these questions, think begin with b and then move with m. So begin and then move. So you always start off with b. That gives you the first point. And then the m is telling you how to move to your second point. And then we only need 2 points and we're done. Okay? So just one quick example. Again, hopefully after you see it once, you'll remember how to do it. Spent a lot of time on this before. So let's say the question was graph y is equal to negative 4x plus 2. Okay, let's go and draw a graph off to the side over here. Something that is going to be important as we get into graphing systems is that a system is going to be very important that you have a nice, accurate graph. Like the graph that I just drew, that's probably pretty sloppy, right? You'd want to be as precise and as exact as possible, especially when it comes to a system of equations. Okay, but we'll get into that later. All right, so we're going to graph this, right? So if you remember, you have to start off by writing down, well, what is m and what is b? Okay, so m and b. M is always the number that's attached to the x. All right, so here's our m value. Okay, but right now it's not a fraction, which is not very helpful, right? Remember, our m is our rise over the run, so we need it to be a fraction. Okay, so we can take that negative 4 and we can make it a fraction, right? We can make anything a fraction by putting it over 1. Okay, now technically that negative, you could have given it to the bottom number as well, or sorry, not as well. You could have given it to the bottom number instead. Right, the negative you can give to the top or the bottom. It doesn't matter which one you give it to, but just make sure you don't give it to both. Right, if you wrote down negative 4 over negative 1, that would be wrong. Okay, the negative goes to one or the other. I usually just assign it to the top. Okay, and then our b value comes after, it's a positive 2. Okay, so we know b is 2, which means we are starting at 0, 2. That's our starting point. We begin with b and then we move with m. Okay, so let's put our first point on the graph. So 0, 2. 0 left and right, up 2. Right there. Okay, so that's our first point. We need one more to be able to draw a line. So now we're going to use our M value. It's going to tell us how to move to the next point. Okay, so remember the top number is the up and down. The fact that it's a -4 means we are going down 4 spaces because negative is a down direction. On the bottom, it's a +1. Positive is a right direction. Remember, the top number is up and down, bottom number is left and right. So from that blue dot that I first drew, I'm going to count down 4 spaces and then right 1 space. Okay, so down 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then right 1. So there's my second coordinate. And that's all I need. Okay. And remember, there was a couple of tricks. Remember, one of the tricks was, let's say you're doing your M value and it doesn't fit on the graph, right? So if going down 4 and right 1 is an issue, remember, you are allowed to do the exact opposite. Remember, you can move that negative to the other side, to the bottom, if you needed to. So you could also go up 4 and then left 1. Okay, you can always do the opposite set of directions because you'll get the same line. Right? If I went from that blue dot and I counted up 4 and then left 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, left 1, it's the same line. So it doesn't matter. But I only need 2 points. Okay, so I only needed those first 2 and I'm set. So we can draw our line and then we're done. Okay, so that's just a very quick review of how to graph these things. The first video we'll be looking at next time is how do you graph a full system of equations.